My name is Jacob Rushvin, founder and CEO of Botsy and the host of Price Power, the podcast for subscription apps to grow their revenue. So typically, I'm having a conversation with world-class growth or app leaders, but this week we're doing something different. This is a best of episode. We haven't done this before, so I'm curious to know what you think. We've got 12 guests, 16 clips, and 1 hour of the most tactical advice from the past 6 months of the podcast. You're going to hear from Muir, Daphne Tideman, Ekaterina Gamsriegler, Michael Parizek, Barbara Galiza, Ashley Black, Shumel Lais, Marcus Burke, Lucas Moscon, Gabe Kwakyi, Xavier Baez, and Anthony Scarpaci. Let's go. Today, we're talking with Muir. Alice is an independent growth consultant helping apps grow by improving their onboarding, paywalls, lifecycle, and pricing and packaging. She worked at the agency Feature for almost 7 years, where she supported Headspace, Visco, Adobe, SoundCloud, and was App Marketer of the Year, and is a Business of Apps Top 100 leader. One concept that's super interesting to understand better, to kind of drive retention, early engagement, monetization, is this strategic friction. How do you think about that? And maybe you can give some examples of how this works and people can use it.
Yeah, so I think the best example that I have of that is MyFitnessPal. So MyFitnessPal basically, it's a household name now. I think many people know MyFitnessPal. But for those that don't, it's basically an app that helps you to track calories, basically, and other kind of your macros and other health and nutrition information. And it's targeted at people that want to get in shape, or they want to lose weight, or they have a goal around that. And what MyFitnessPal originally did was they had a lot of stuff on the free tier, including barcode scanning, right? So essentially, you could manually input your calorie information or your nutrition information, and you could also, for speed and efficiency, you could also use a barcode scanner to do that as well. And then what they had behind the paywall was more premium kind of information about like recipes or going deeper into like macros and like this type of stuff, right? And like I would say that there wasn't a lot of strategic friction there, because essentially a user that wanted to lose weight, who was focused on their the simple calories in, calories out, they could pretty much do everything with MyFitnessPal and they didn't have to subscribe, right? And then a few years later, as MyFitnessPal grew, they kind of cottoned on to this and they realized, right, okay, actually one of our most valuable features, which is the speed and efficiency part, is free. So let's put that behind a paywall. And I think I understood their logic. I think it was very smart what they did. I think they did it far too late, because customers or users were already expecting to have that for free, right? And it had been that way for years. And so like I worked with MyFitnessPal back when I worked at Feature, and I always think about that example when I think about strategic friction, or I'm trying to explain it. And it's exactly as you said, it's helping users get like 80% of their problem done, but you're leaving like the last 20% if they really want to complete their problem, or they really want to like do something well and it's out like something that's outcome driven. They need to upgrade to be able to do that. So if we go back to the MyFitnessPal example, with strategic friction, a user could, still input their calorie information or their nutritional information, but if they wanted that speed and efficiency part, they actually needed to be a subscriber to do that, so they could do it in a way that wasn't painfully frustrating.
Today, we're talking with Daphne Tideman. Daphne is a growth advisor and consultant for wellness apps, and all-around product-led growth superstar. This connects to how you're talking about, or you differentiate between time to first value versus time to core value as two layers of activation. Can you tell me more about that framework?
Yeah, so that's really inspired by the kind of like SaaS product-led growth space. I think Wes Bush talks about a similar concept also in his book, but I'm not sure if he's the one who originally came up with it, because it's been cited in different places. But I think it's an interesting framework, just because I don't want to claim credit for something that I haven't embedded in any way. The time to first value, that's kind of that initial, like what we were talking about earlier, that mini like little aha moments where users might not have gotten the full value, but they see that app could help them. It's like, this is for me. This is something that could help me. It's like, what Noom does with a personalized plan and reassuring you throughout the weight loss app, just for those not familiar. They give you a personalized plan. They reassure you throughout it. They ask you questions and teach you things. And those are little moments of perceived value. And they could be action-based, but they could also just be learning something. And we want that time to first value really to happen in the first session, and ideally happen quite quickly, that we've built enough trust to keep them going. And then the time to core value, that does take longer. I think for most apps, like, it probably does take a few days to get there. And remember, I'm working with wellness apps, so the time to first value to core value is probably slightly longer than some other apps. For some apps, it could be on day one already, but it's like, usually it's that a user is doing something repetitively and feeling that benefit. So actually, have committed to doing, a meditation or two already, and are starting to notice the difference, and they're really starting to build a habit around it. So like, for example, for Blinkist, the first value could be, oh, you see that you could actually read a book and feel convinced, like, hey, I can actually read a summary and I can make time for this. It's really easy to use, fits into my lifestyle. There's a book that I want to read, and then you're starting to get excited about it. But like, the time to core value might be either finishing that first book or having a 3-day streak. And what that core value is, or how many times that is a little bit dependent on what actually predicts that retention.
I think breaking those different moments up allows teams to be more focused.
I think it makes it easier to understand that you don't have to have a big thing in the first moment. And it also makes it easier to actually measure the timing of these things and see, like, hey, if the time to core value is too long, we probably need to get them first to the first value a bit shorter and quicker, because usually that's then what's taking too long, that they're not seeing the first value, and we need to shorten that down. And I think it also helps them, like, kind of break it up into stages versus seeing it as like one flat metric. Because I think that's the other challenge, is like, it isn't just one metric often in activation. There's often like a first step, a second step. And that's what I meant early on with that 2D versus like 3D thinking, of like realizing, like, it isn't just this like, hey, we need to do one little thing and they're retained. No, it's usually a few different things, and getting them into, a setup where they are actually going to use it. So like, for example, for a time blocking app, the first value might be actually seeing, like, hey, I've managed to block everything, get myself set up. This is exciting. Like, I can choose exactly what I've been struggling with. I feel like it will actually help me. But then the core value might be having like a first full session, or it might be having 2 sessions. So I think having those different moments helps you understand where you're losing people and what the issue is.
I've often heard and kind of used this myself in terms of like a setup moment, aha moment, or activation, and then like habit moment, ongoing.
Yeah, that's another phrase used often.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so talked a lot about like how to think about activation metrics, how to influence this, but how do you actually test whether an activation metric is real or vanity or actually influencing anything?
Yeah. So this is where having good data tracking is kind of the prerequisite. I think that's one of the biggest challenges I see with this, is that if we're not tracking the right things, and we can't backtrack it, then it's going to take a while before we can get this confidence. But what I'm looking for is like, okay, activated users are retaining significantly better. When we test that across different like cohorts and channels, we understand that, like, hey, this is consistent across most of the cohorts, most of the channels. It isn't just like one like high, because sometimes you have it, for example, that users who come through like a strong organic source, like through an influencer that they trust, they might naturally kind of retain better or do a certain action because they've been told to do that, but it's not predictive of all users. And then I'll look at like, okay, does this metric actually also improve the downstream metrics? So what we also talked about, where if they're activated and using, but if they're not paying, that's probably not going to be like helpful. So I think those are kind of the things that I will look for. And then without going on a user interview rampage again, I would say they're also very powerful in kind of like sense checking is that also in the user's mind? What matters to them? Is that actually what they perceive as value? Because it might be, I think there's a difference between what you need someone to do to get value out of your app versus what someone sees as value. And both are important, but I would consider like a good activation metric to be also reflective of them getting value, not just you getting them set up.
Today we're joined by Ekaterina Gamsriegler. Ekaterina is currently head of growth and marketing at My Group. She previously led marketing at Mimo, and she scaled products to 30 million plus users and over 20 million ARR. How important is to think about your pricing? How big a lever is pricing? Yeah, we'll start there. I have a few follow-ups. Let's start there.
Definitely a big lever, very powerful, massive. So, however, most of the apps I've personally worked with and I would say been exposed to like throughout my career usually start monetizing very cautiously. They're more likely to start with prices that are lower than what they can potentially charge. And I don't see it as a bad thing. I see it as a nice way to start experimenting with like how many users you can convert without pissing them off, basically, because very early you usually have very small, very loyal set of users to whom you're providing value, right? That's why I think overall in the industry, it's much more common to see the prices go up rather than some subscription app lowering the prices. We see it, and we maybe to some extent also get conditioned by examples from Netflix or Spotify, which are content apps which deliver very similar amount of value throughout the user experience. And this is a completely separate category from, for example, self-improvement apps or like personal improvement apps. For this, I would say, yeah, it's not very common to lower the prices over time. However, personally, I see it, have seen it a few times in the past as a very valuable and working tactic. It definitely hits your lifetime value. Like, that's for sure. You need to be prepared for this. You need to be ready for this trade-off, and you need to find the balance between the two, between your conversion to purchase rate and getting enough paying customers and the lifetime value. In my head, I see roughly 4 cases when lowering the price makes sense. Like the first one is when you're charging something that is way off the mental category into which you're falling into the customer's head, because each of us has that. There are products that are nice to have. There are products that are, let's say, painkillers. We are willing to pay different prices for them. A second reason would be that if you never localized prices before, and in some countries they also simply don't match the mentality, the acceptable price ranges, or the payment methods that are used there. Also, lower prices might sometimes simply align with your company mission. So if you are about making something accessible or maybe monetizing through donations, like I think this is also fair to go this route. And another reason can be is when, again, there is an established category in the consumer's mind and all your competitors have a certain feature parity and deliver the experience that the users expect, and you don't have that. You simply know that a few critical things are missing for that. So all of these that you maybe can get signals for during user interviews or like exploring the market, doing the competition research, together with very low conversion rate to trial and purchase, would signal to me that decreasing the price might be a good test to run. So if your users are well aware of your offer and yet nobody is buying, of course, like sometimes the way you communicate value can be the thing to fix. So let's say you tell a certain story about your product in the onboarding and on the paywall. So sometimes you can try to fix the story before you actually fix the number, but sometimes you just have to fix the number and then end up with having a solid stream of paying customers from whom you can get more and more data and insights to figure out where to go next.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, because everybody just says, raise your prices, you're not charging enough, raise your prices, you'll make more money. But in reality, it's not that simple.
Today, we're talking with Michal Parizek. Michal is a senior growth product manager at Mojo and an expert in mobile subscription app monetization conversion optimization.
Something I was really curious about is, you talked about looking at both short-term revenue and it's like 13-month revenue or 13-month LTV prediction when evaluating price tests. How do you blend these signals when deciding whether to actually ship a variant from an experiment?
Yeah. So for kind of all price tests, we figure out that we just can't focus on new revenue as we usually did for some other tests like payroll design tests. Because what we've seen that prices, particularly when we've increased prices, what we've seen then is lower renewal rates for like monthly plans and some signals for lower renewal rates for the yearly plan. So we wanted to make sure that by potentially shipping a new set of prices, we wanted to make sure that we were not harming the long-term revenue, like year one, year two, etc. So we are thinking like how to evaluate it early enough, so we don't need to wait like a few months or a year when we do a price test. It won't be really convenient. So we figured out that what we could do is to have like a prediction for, we call it like month 13, which is essentially kind of you have like the full revenue for the full 1 year, and then you have sort of like a glimpse of or like a peek on what's going to be the year two revenue. So what we then do, we take the new revenue for essentially what we get on day one or like in the first days, and then we essentially have a sum with new revenue, that one, and the 13-month new revenue projection. And then what we get is essentially like a sort of like a long-term revenue indication, and that's how we then sort of decide on the variant, on whether we essentially ship it or not, or roll out or not the testing variant.
Do you have this calculation like automated, set up in like a data warehouse or the dashboard, or is this manual? You're doing this each time?
There was sort of like a report template, which we then reuse for the price test, and we pull the data usually like manually from Amplitude or Revenue Kit for the renewal rates, and the calculation for this 13-month revenue projection was the first sort of input, which was super key, was a proxy to renewal rates. And what we've used as a proxy was like 7-day cancellation rate, because we find out that in data that actually like lots of, I think 20 to 30% of the cancellation, like subscription cancellation, happened in the early days, in let's say the first 7 or 10 days. So in the first 7 or 10 days, you already kind of know what the renewal rate might be for certain cohort. So we measured that 7-day cancellation rate for each variant, each price point, and we then use it to predict what the renewal rate will be for the year one for yearly plans, or for month one for the monthly plans. And we essentially take we know that, let's say, the 7-day cancellation rate for the testing variant is 20% higher than the baseline. So we know that very likely the renewal rate for month one could be also like 20% higher. And essentially using that insight, then we can calculate all the other renewal rates, and then with that we can actually sort of predict what's going to be the total revenue for the monthly subscription, let's say for the whole month, so for the 12 month next to each other. And very similarly for yearly subscription. So it's important to, if you have enough data, of course, for monthly and yearly plans, to basically calculate it separately. So you have like 7-day cancellation rate for the monthly plans and the 7-day cancellation rate for the yearly plans. And then if you had that, and if you get enough confidence in those data, then you are able actually to quite confidently predict what's going to be the renewal rate. And then you can again use that sort of simple calculation to calculate the predicted renewal rate or predicted renewal revenue for that particular variant.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you found, it makes sense for annual where the there's just one term. You found that for monthly as well, that even just for the monthly first period, that the monthly renewal patterns follow the same kind of curve, and that even in those first 7 days of monthly cancellations, based on your pre-existing data, you can model out what that kind of the curve will be in terms of renewals.
What we did for the monthly, we essentially used that the 7-day cancellation to calculate the month 1 sort of renewal, and then for month 2, month 3, month 4, month 5, we essentially kept the curve similar in terms of percentage, like when say month 3 versus month 2. So essentially the curve is same, but the starting point is different because early in the subscription, there were less people or more people canceling, and then the curve sort of stayed the same. But since in Mojo we've got the majority of the subscription in the yearly plans, essentially like what was like super essential for us was the yearly plan. So we got it a bit easier because, as you said, it's just essentially one number. It's just one renewal rate. But the logic I described, we applied for monthly.
Right, and so potentially, if you have a large number of monthly users, you could maybe get a little more complicated. But it's not the priority for you, where the majority of the accuracy comes from projecting annual plans, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what
So
you're
the priority.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I was just going to ask if the you found that even with price increases or decreases in the annual plan, the cancellation pattern still stays the same, and so that those 7-day cancellation rates remain accurate. It's just like you say, a multiplier a little up or a little down, but that's still that, the ratios remain the same.
Yeah, we've then checked after, let's say, 6 or 12 months after we roll out essentially the higher price or lower price. Then we check the renewal rate and compared with what the model or the prediction said. And luckily for us, we could see that there was the pattern. It wasn't maybe like exactly the same, but we've seen that when we predicted that the renewal rate is going to go down by, let's say, 20%, it kind of did really go down by roughly, it was like something between like 15 to 25%. So we've seen that some change in the game. And regarding like whether like still the 7-day cancellation rate kind of stayed reliable or relevant, and we can actually even like essentially with even lowering or higher pricing it saves fees, like pretty big chunk of cancellations happening in the first 7 to 10 days actually. So we still see that, which is still like at least like a good signal for us that we can still use that sort of proxy to translate or to use it for prediction of renewal rates in the future.
Yeah, so in terms of that, using cancellation rate as that predictor for new apps maybe launching that don't have a full year's worth of annual renewal data, do you have any like easy multiplier to use for them? If you receive, X number of cancellations in the first 7 days, multiply that times 4, and you'll probably get a good renewal rate. Of course, it's not every app has slightly different renewal rates, and it's not perfect, but just for the people to get a range.
Well, I think for like new apps, I think What's good is to look for some benchmarks. There's like a couple of benchmarks available. I think it's quite easy to search and look for your app or your vertical and look and yearly monthly retention. So like the yearly retention will probably be somewhere between, could be like 20 to 30% or 15 to 25. I think depends here on the market, on the vertical, on the various factor. But if you don't have yet any history in renewal rate, I think the benchmarks are probably the best resource for that. And then you can use that sort of as a prediction of what's gonna your apps available.
Today, we're talking with Barbara Galiza. I first came across Barbara from her written content and post on LinkedIn a year or two ago. She has 15 years of marketing growth analytics experience. She's worked with brands including Microsoft, WeTransfer, Molly, Vidio, DBT Labs, Dentsu, and more. Now she's the founder of Fix My Tracking, a service for marketers dealing with broken or untrustworthy conversions.
Yeah, like the problem usually with subscription apps is that usually the conversion to when it actually becomes revenue tends to happen outside look back windows. So for example, Meta, I think the maximum, if I'm not mistaken, look back window that you can have there is 7 days post click, and it's rare the situations where you have a revenue event for a subscription product that occurs before those 7 days, because usually there is a period of a trial, and a trial can be 7 days, 14 days. It can be a longer period there too. So it's important to have a value, and the most important reason to have this value is so you're making a distinction to the ad platform on what's a valuable user and what's a not so valuable user. So usually, what the most advanced, app companies are doing is that they're passing an offline event. So like a server to server event that, estimates, calculates how likely it is for the user to convert, or what do they predict their value to be.
And that is a kind of predictive revenue value, or so they're passing that back to the ad network in the kind of revenue parameter as and is that done? We have 30% of our trials convert, and is that a simple estimation of that, or is it more complicated?
No, because basically, like 30% of your trials is not going to tell you which trials are the valuable ones. So that's what you need to get to. You need to get to a place where, you're trying to identify out of these, 100 people that started the trials, which 30 ones are the most likely to go on to convert. So that's kind of the predictive value that you're looking at. And that is done, in different ways. But, like a common way that, companies do is like looking at the features that they've used, in their first 24 hours or in the first 48 hours of app usage. Certain features for products tend to indicate that the user is more likely to pay. Perhaps there's other signals that are relevant to your business. They also take it in, something like, they've already looked into the plans. Like you can see that they visited the page that has plans. They've shown an interest to subscribe. That is, even for B2B companies, visits to the pricing page is a very common variable that is used to build predictive models.
Got it. Yeah. And I think it's not simple, right? It's not just a simple thing to build these predictive models. I'm sure some teams do it internally. There's a lot more companies springing up to offer this. Churney, I know, is one. I think there's lots of others out there that solve this problem, but it's not a simple one. It's probably a later term strategy, right? It's probably not, if you're a newer app, is this something you should think about, or is this more optimizing, scaling large campaigns?
Well, I think for most businesses, they can probably postpone having some type of predictive value, because maybe they have, like other signals,
that they can take into consideration to assess how a user is worth. But with mobile apps, with subscription apps in specific, because the revenue action is occurring almost always outside of the look back window, you need to have something in place that tells the ad platform this is a good user or this is a bad user. Okay, like for the first iteration, you're not going to have a predicted LTV that matches the reality 2 years from sign up. Obviously, like that we're talking about like very, very highly developed algorithms. But at the very least, you need to be like, okay, this user, came back to the app within, 2 hours. Like, they've clicked through the features. Like, you need to have some kind of signal that you're using. And that can be as simple as, we're going to take all people that create an account, and then we're going to, okay, either they're worth 0, either they're worth 10, either they're worth 20, it can be something even as simple as that. But you need to have some kind of variant that tells you how much this user is worth. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to be stuck with running CAC. So you're going to be stuck with, a bid-based model where you're paying like per install. And then what the platform is going to do is going to optimize for the cheapest installs. And the cheapest installs usually is, like if you've run paid campaigns for apps, it's like 17-year-olds. Like it's usually, the cheapest install is usually not the install that converts into a paying customer. So you cannot really postpone for too long if you want to do pay media. At least not at scale.
Today on the Price Power podcast, we're talking with Ashley Black. Ashley is a Google App Campaigns rock star. She was head of app ad sales at Google, where she shaped Google's go-to-market iOS roadmap and worked with thousands of apps. She is now the founder of Candid Consulting, where she's bringing all this knowledge to the world to deliver high-performing marketing strategies. Something else I saw you writing about recently was that if you're not getting good enough signal with maybe just trial conversion events, that maybe you should look deeper at retention events to further optimize those campaigns and getting those stronger signals. I thought that was made so much sense. And I think, I work a lot in kind of the retention monetization world. So, I do similar kind of analyses and correlation analysis to see what early engagement events correlate with long-term conversion retention. And so, when is that, or I guess talk me through like how you think about doing that and then when that's a good strategy for apps.
I think honestly, you should be thinking about it all the time. I think too often people are like sort of have this mindset on like, okay, well, what's that one event that we're going to track and measure? And you have to kind of think about it a little bit more dynamically. And so, the example that you're referencing or what I had talked about is like I had one client who was optimizing for just registration complete. So they just wanted to see who was going through their whole registration flow. And if they completed that whole flow, then like that's what they wanted to optimize for. But ultimately, like those users weren't sticking around for that long. Like the retention on those users wasn't great. And retention was a big play for them because for this particular app, they really cared about monthly active users. That was sort of their main KPI that they were looking at. So we did a bunch of analysis to try and find, well, what was another event that was happening with a great frequency, right? Because like, that's one thing, like, yeah, sure. Everybody would love to optimize for like something super deep funnel, but then you can't optimize based off of 5 users. So like we need something that has volume. And for them, they're a messaging app. What we ended up finding is that, actually it's not so much the registration complete, but if they actually start a conversation with somebody, so they start messaging somebody, that is when we see the stickiness, the retention improve a lot. And again, at volume, right? There were other things that showed greater stickiness, but like the number of users was too low, so we couldn't use those. So that's how we ultimately ended up deciding to pivot for them and say, we're going to shift away from just this registration complete, filling out a bunch of, questionnaire questions, and move toward them actually starting to take some action in the app. And so I think if you can think through, what are those early additional actions that a user takes. I think, you and I are familiar with one particular app, right, that we've talked about and worked on. And one thing that we're looking at is like, okay, what if we stop just optimizing for a start trial and instead like the action that they take immediately after? So did they watch, like, let's call it the tutorial? Did they complete the tutorial after the start trial? Or did they, I don't want to give it away, but like, did they do something else immediately following, something that probably happens within like the next 5 minutes after starting the trial? And is there enough volume in that for us to be able to then optimize for that action instead of just start trial? So, it's going to vary depending on your app and like how it functions, but thinking beyond just, what is sort of required of the user.
Yeah, this reminds me of like activation analysis to figure out, general, like what is our activation moment in the app when we're trying to figure out what leads to long-term retention. And so, I do that by, we're trying to figure out the right path for a user. What is this activation moment that we can kind of guide users to through product changes or growth changes or experiments? And it sounds, pretty similar to kind of that process of looking at a number of events and trying to figure out what correlates with long-term retention or conversion. And so is that generally how you'd recommend someone trying to go find this event? Just looking at kind of the correlation between a bunch of events and seeing what has potential for like a predictive value?
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully, you have a team or you're capable of doing it yourself to be able to understand. And I think honestly, a lot of times it's probably a little bit obvious if there's like a clear flow, right? Like let's use the messaging app. It's like, okay, if they started a conversation, it means that they had somebody else to talk to on the app. And so that right there shows that there's like more stickiness, right? Like they're joining or they're on the app so that they can communicate with somebody else, as opposed to, let's just say, like watching a video in it. Like that's not as meaningful probably to you because that's not the intent of the app. They're not in that particular app. They're not like serving ads in videos or anything. And so there's not as much value in a user like that. So I don't know. To me, I think that it kind of stands out a little bit, but yeah, you got to do some of the analytics to figure it out. In this case, like it did take us a while to sort of like understand, there were so many other events that, like I said, showed high retention, but we needed something that happened within 24 hours, really, really quick, so that we could still send that signal back to Google in a short period of time. And like I said, there was still a high volume of users so that we were getting enough volume.
Today, we're talking with Shumel Lais. Shumel has spent 15 years immersed in performance marketing for consumer apps. He was the founder of AppSumer, which was acquired by InMobi, and is now building Day 30, a new solution in signal engineering for subscription apps.
A super popular topic, which you are very well suited to speak about, is signal engineering. And I know Day 30 is built around this idea. And I was reading something you wrote, and I really like your description of choosing conversion events that better represent user value than what ad platforms can see on their own. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, how you landed on that framing of signal engineering and for Day 30?
Yeah, so I think the term signal engineering, I don't think I can take credit for coming up with that term. I think that was Thomas Petit and Eric. They've been kind of posting on the topic. But the concept of coming up with a predictive signal, that's kind of what we started looking into before that term kind of became popular. But in essence, it's the same thing. So what we are aware, we can see these ad platforms like Meta, they're becoming very algorithmic. So it's very, they're kind of taking away a lot of the controls that marketeers have, whereas historically you may be managing your bids and budgets and targeting, and they're really pushing you into this world of just like give us your goal and we'll try and find the best users to reach that goal. So the topic of signal engineering is really like, how do we feed these ad platforms the best goal, especially in this iOS world where there's a limitation on how far visibility the ad platforms have. So if I take Meta as an example, they're typically limited to 7 days of visibility in terms of that goal event that you can send. But what marketers typically care about, or apps, subscription apps in particular, is usually something a lot further down funnel. So typically revenue or return on ad spend. And a lot of that doesn't materialize till outside of this window. So that's really where this topic of signal engineering comes in, of how can we find something that's better, correlates better to that longer term value that you're after, that the ad platforms otherwise couldn't see. So that's really kind of how we landed on that topic. And some of it came from historically from some past campaigns going back a few years ago, where I teamed up with a data scientist, and we ended up solving for this problem where there was just a delay in a user behavior. And that's when I got introduced into the world of machine learning and data science and how that could overcome that. So that was kind of where the idea stemmed from. But I think more recently, it's been kind of coined signal engineering, which I think is a pretty good name for it.
Yeah, got it. That makes sense. And so maybe you can dumb it down for me a bit. Like, what's like? Can you be like a simple example of like what's actually happening here and how, like, some app, what an app is actually doing?
Yeah, so I think if we park kind of machine learning and data science for a second and just think at the most kind of basic level, signal engineering is really just the process of selecting an event or creating a conversion event. So you always start with what's the goal. So let's say our goal is a paying subscriber of an app. Let's assume there's a 30-day trial. And that's what we're trying to bridge the gap to. So the status quo, what a lot of apps would go after, is optimizing to a trial start event, because for anyone to become this paying subscriber, they would go through this trial first. So that's kind of the starting point. And then signal engineering is, can we find something better? So at the most basic level, you may find other behaviors that correlate with someone actually going on to subscribe. So if you let's say a language learning app, it could be the number of lessons that you completed. So could we do, start trial plus someone who's completed 5 lessons? That would be like a very basic example of how you could build, one output or a signal to the ad platform. So instead of just going for trials, go for people who do a trial and a behavior as well.
I've also heard people talking about like qualified trials where the user didn't cancel immediately in the first hour or something.
Yeah, and that's another really good example as well. And that works when you're almost like just purely trial focused as well. And then there's a question of how long do you want to wait or give for those trials to cancel. And certain apps you'll see, like usually you find it with slightly younger demographic focus targeted apps where they're just very familiar with this ability to cancel immediately. So you see a big portion of those cancellations happening straight away. So that's where it works quite well. And then you've got some apps that maybe have like a slightly longer user journey, and slightly more mature users who actually want to test the app. So you may not get as many of those cancellations early, but that's also a very good example of signal engineering at the most basic level.
Do you think like this concept of signal engineering is because of the trial, because trial is essentially a low quality signal, because if people are buying direct and just purchasing, that's the highest quality signal, right? And so is it all kind of like this, trying to get a proxy around this, and is this mostly driven from that subscription model, but then also like platform limitations? Is that you think that's kind of the genesis?
Yeah, I think it's definitely driven by this kind of structural issue with attribution and the platform's visibility. And I don't think it's just limited to subscription apps. If anything, actually, I think this has been around a lot longer in the gaming space. And in gaming, there's a lot more variability. So it's not just has someone subscribed, yes or no. It's a case of how much value do I think they're going to be worth, or how many in-app tokens they're gonna spend. So there's a lot more to predict. So for subscriptions, trial is definitely an aspect, and I definitely agree. Like we also see people who have a mix of trial and non-trial or initial purchases as well. But typically those initial purchases are shorter. So they're typically like weekly or monthly subscriptions. And even in that instance, they're offering those because they know over, 3 months or 4 months, those users are going to renew. And so again, there's still an opportunity for signal engineering there because there's still this gap of visibility. So yes, Meta could see that initial purchase, and that will probably be stronger than a start trial for users who do that. But there's still a difference between a user who renews only once or doesn't renew at all versus one that's still retained in 6 weeks or 12 weeks time.
Yeah. So regardless if it's just trials, because you're right. Yeah. A lot of times if you have a weekly plan, you may not offer a trial, but you're still trying to, understand and predict what is the true LTV of this user based on their attributes, based on what we see. Are they going to retain? What's their real value? And then it's also like the combination of different purchase types, upsells, and then sending the right signal for all of those. Where it's like if you're just sending on a trial start, do you combine that with your other purchase signal? How do you differentiate all that? And so it gets pretty complicated quick.
Yeah, so I think visibility is like one aspect of it. So you could argue, if you've got an app with a 3-day trial only, and then they convert, and it's only an annual plan, do you need signal engineering? There's an argument to say, does it fit within the 7 days? So that's where you have these other aspects of signal engineering, which is kind of plays to the specific requirements of the ad platform. So if I take Meta as an example, there's another variable which is signal volume. So not just signal accuracy of predicting future value, but also is it getting enough volume? So sometimes you might find actually you have visibility into purchases, or there's a really short trial, but the people who actually convert are only 20% of the people who start a trial. So all of a sudden you lose a lot of volume, and platforms like Meta still need that signal volume. So you're kind of balancing these two aspects, which I'd say the key aspects is the volume and then the precision side of it.
When does ML based signal engineering make sense?
Yeah, so I'd say one of the requirements of signal engineering, or if I double down a bit on Meta, is where majority of people's spend is going. This isn't like a definitive rule, but a general rule that we've seen is like you want to get at least 10 conversions per campaign per day. So that is what I would set as a starting point. And if your current trial starts aren't getting that, then you definitely don't want to be doing signal engineering because you're not hitting that threshold. And although 10 sounds like not a lot, sometimes depending on the markets that you're targeting, that cost per trial can be quite high. It can be from, $20 all the way up to $100, for example, depending especially if you're targeting the US. So if you multiply that by 10, all of a sudden, the spend starts increasing quite a lot. So that's where I would say spend is quite a big aspect of signal engineering and that answers, should we go down funnel or not? So I think that's just the general principle. Whether we should get into ML-based signal engineering is answering the first part. The next is the kind of data you have, and do you have enough as well? So what we've typically found is it's quite rare that people have enough behavioral data tagged in their MMP. They usually have to go into something like a mixed panel, and the ML models are only as good as your data is. So again, if you're like a language learning app, do you have all the lessons tagged up? Do you have different tracks tagged up? Like all of this can become inputs. So I'd say that's how I kind of look at data. It's less to do with like number of users. It's more the number of conversions you're starting with to the ad platform.
Why do you need it in MMP? Are you still using the kind of MMP postbacks to the network to optimize?
The MMP is more from a measurement perspective.
Okay.
So the MMP is really more, one is, yes, the MMP data can feed into the ML model. So some people have enough behavioral data in the MMP, but the benefit of the MMP for signal engineering is purely measurement. So what we would do whenever we do signal engineering is we don't want to just blindly run it. We want to A/B test it. So we would have a campaign optimizing to start trial, and then we'd have a campaign optimizing to, let's say, this predictive subscriber event. And by having an MMP, that's how you can truly see like your day 30 ROAS for the start trial campaign versus a predictive signal campaign. And without an MMP, you wouldn't be able to answer that.
Got it. So it's not necessarily for the signal engineering side, but for the measurement and understanding of kind of our cohorted, ROAS, for example.
Yeah, and where the MMP can also help is it can also act as like the gateway for the signal itself. So there's again a couple of options for anyone doing signal engineering. You can either send these signals or server-side events directly to Meta using the conversion API, or you could send it to your MMP and then they would forward it to Meta. The benefit of it going through the MMP is you could, that one point can also forward it to TikTok. It could forward it to AppLovin, Liftoff, and all these other ad platforms as well. But both work in principle, but that's just another benefit of going through an MMP.
Today, we're talking with Meta Ads expert Marcus Burke. Marcus has helped top subscription apps grow further and others scale to millions in revenue. He's worked with Blinkist, Cal AI, and many more.
And then I think that idea about the creative is the targeting, right? I think that's another message you have. And it's on multiple levels, right? The creative is the targeting through what ratio is it? What type of creative is it? But then also what's the actual message on the creative? Because that'll inherently get shown to different people it'll resonate with, and then you can understand how those creative messages convert based on user goals or other questions that you ask during onboarding, and then figuring out how to layer it all together is the tricky part.
That's where it gets interesting, yeah. And that media type format piece is something people tend to forget. Like they think of, when I call out women or men in my hook, then it's going to target women versus men. But then, really, if you never make a static, then your likelihood of showing up on Facebook feed is a whole lot lower. So kind of the media type has a big role in this, just because different content types are kind of native to these different placements. So really, as you're kicking off a new account, like always test very broadly. Like look into carousels, video carousels, statics, 9:16, 1:1. I'm just testing. I'm preparing a test with playables for a client of mine, which are actually only work on Facebook feed from what I know. I never tried them before with Facebook. There again, that if that ad is only going to show up in Facebook feed, then that could be super interesting because that's where kind of a high quality older audience lives. And if you never made a playable before, then you would never see kind of 100% Facebook feed distribution on any ad, because even a static also goes on Instagram feed and others. And if there's always going to be kind of some wastage somewhere where kind of due to the broad targeting, your ad ends up in places where you shouldn't be. And then you can always kind of try to optimize and figure out like how do I push it in the kind of best, the most optimal distribution.
And so, what I'm hearing is to really kind of scale campaigns, you need to figure out these efficiencies. You need to understand where the opportunities are to kind of hit your goals and to be able to scale there. Where if you're just hitting broad on everything, things are going to get expensive faster, and you're not going to really understand why.
Yeah, pretty much. Like in the end, you're going to hit a ceiling quite quickly, just because Meta, if you throw everything into one campaign, one ad set, then Meta just optimizes for the kind of lowest cost per event. And especially for a subscription app that's usually not related to business value, you're driving cheap trials. Right. A cheap trial isn't worth anything until it converts. So the algorithm shouldn't be taking all the decisions. You need to kind of infer that additional knowledge around what's happening after someone starts a trial.
Yes, and so passing the right signal, the right data, the right trials, so Meta can go find more of those trials that you say are important, not what it infers are.
Yeah, I mean, that's then already kind of signal engineering. You can, of course, try to pass it as an actual signal into the algorithm so it gets smarter. But even if you don't do that, then you have that kind of knowledge. So use that knowledge to build your campaigns in a way that it spends on the audiences that are most relevant. That's kind of the two sides there. Signal engineering also very hot hot term these days. Did a webinar with Thomas with Revenue Cat the other day. Like the closer you can move your conversion signal to an actual business outcome, the better, of course, Meta gets at buying the right audiences and not just the cheapest ones in the end. But yeah, that's definitely advanced territory. Like smaller advertisers tend to be starting on like a start trial or maybe a subscription purchase if they kind of have also like direct purchases on their paywall. And then over time, maybe you move into something like a qualified trial where you figure out, well, let's kind of not send signal for some of these people, or like only kind of infer some additional data points. Like, I don't know, OS is usually an interesting one where like older, like newer devices and OSs tend to convert better. Age, as we already said, so you can get really smart over time. And there's like companies like Day30, Journey, those signal engineering providers that help you basically look across all of your data points and like find out, well, if we cut these 40%, how much higher would our trial conversion be? And that definitely gets very interesting as you scale, because as said, AI is taking over more and more. So really creative and signal are the two main things you can be working on. There is some work to be done with account architecture, as we just said, but then other than that, it's not like you're going to set up 50 ad sets, some targeting male and female in different age groups as you used to back in the days. So definitely signal is one of the levers that you can still be pulling. The algorithm knows very little about what makes your business profitable in the end, because you're optimizing for that shallow event. While if you're moving closer and closer to business value, then you have a smarter algorithm, meaning you can have more, call it consolidation, just because it can actually see that, well, a cheap cost per registration from Instagram Reels isn't worth anything because people don't convert to that subscription or to that purchase, meaning it will theoretically over time start deprioritizing their placement because it sees it's not driving an efficient kind of cost per purchase for your business. But of course there is like, in the end, why I say like don't over consolidate is that whole part that we discussed before, that in the end, different creatives go onto different placements, and Meta is to this date pretty bad at kind of diversifying there and distributing spend more evenly. Oftentimes, it will pretty quickly hone in on like a creative winner saying, well, this is the very best ad, and I'm going to spend 80% plus of my budget in an ad set on that very ad. And of course, everyone talks about kind of creative diversity and like creating an account that of course is sustainable and free of risk. But if Meta always pushes all your spend into one creative, then that is pretty risky in the end, because if that creative stops working, then performance is going to die. So it's always your job to kind of push away from that a bit. And that's why I kind of tend to tell my clients, well, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Make sure we have a few ad sets that are different, delivering to different kind of placement mixes, audiences. And if one dies, then we're still good with the others. And of course, that architecture in the end should then be driven by how much does Meta actually know about my business? Are they very smart? Am I optimizing for value because I'm kind of sending back my purchases with values attached to them? I maybe even set a ROAS target, something that is not super common for subscription apps, but for example, in gaming, there, of course, you have to worry much less about them buying cheap traffic that's not converting. While if your event is very upper funnel, then you need to do the job of structuring campaigns in a way that they go after the audiences that you know have highest value. I hope that makes sense.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it does. It does. And so for pretty much any app with a 7-day trial, like until you get a lot of data and a lot of understanding of kind of what users are valuable, it's kind of impossible to get to that revenue or real value metric, right? Sending that back. So you're always stuck with this trial that's kind of incomplete. And so that goes back to what we were talking about before of trying to guide the algorithm to the right users. Do you think it makes sense for more subscription apps to test not having a trial or test certain plans with no trial to get some more revenue data earlier?
I've seen apps doing very, very well with not offering a trial and optimizing for that. But that was in the AI vertical. And I think kind of AI apps, like there is a very high willingness to pay. Like we had purchase rates beyond 10%, even without offering a trial, which is just crazy. So in the end, I think it's a nice kind of challenge to think about. Like, do we actually need the trial? Do we need the trial on every product? What kind of signal would it give us if there was direct purchases involved? Just because kind of someone buying something on day one and actually giving you money is a very, very good signal for the algorithm, and someone just starting a trial isn't. And I think it makes sense to at least challenge that idea that kind of everything always needs to be kind of trial on all the products and 7 days, just because you can't really optimize for like a purchase then. It's also outside the kind of the attribution window of 7 days post-click, and also with AEM, which is their fingerprinting. In the end, the accuracy deteriorates quite badly over time, just because signal isn't available anymore. So you need to optimize for something that happens on day one, preferably in the first session. And with a trial, as we said before, we can enrich it a bit and try to figure out, well, which are my most relevant and high quality trials, and only send those. But of course, it's never going to be a true purchase. And having that in the mix somehow can be very helpful, I think. And like in the end, like a lot of headaches were gone when we just optimized for pure purchases. It was clear that Meta only receives kind of who is in the end valuable to us, and that made sure we're never wasting any money on low quality audiences, which was great to see.
Today on the Price Power podcast, we're talking with Lucas Moscon. I was pretty excited to talk to Lucas because he is likely one of the most knowledgeable people in the world on how mobile attribution actually works under the hood. He was a senior acquisition manager at Monkey Taps. He's been an advisor to large companies like Life360 and is now the founder of AppStack.
It seems like it's positive for the overall app ecosystem, where there maybe was too much confidence in your attribution previously that was unfounded, where you thought that you knew exactly where came from, or kind of the performance of this channel, where maybe now kind of the veil has been uncovered of maybe your attribution wasn't so accurate before, and now that actually aggregated is better, or maybe not. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't think it's better or worse. I think it's like it just forces you to see all the layers. It forces you to see the blended, the deterministic, the probabilistic. Like again, it's all about. I think that, for example, when I talk with apps, and they're like, "Oh, I want to see if my campaign is on iOS have a return on ad spend of 100% on day 7, or they even want to know if the ad has a ROAS day 7 of 100%. I tell them like, dude, that's not how it works today. I wish that's the case. And basically what I try to help them is to be able to try to abstract their business from ROAS metrics and focus on ROI, which ensures like more realistic numbers. So for example, I've been advising a really big health and fitness application, and basically their main source of truth and where they make most of their decisions, it's an ROI chart where they just basically fetch ad spend from the ad networks, revenue coming from the store consoles or their subscription platform, and also they divide that by install date. So they know, okay, this cohort of users, it's profitable at the ad network level or even at the company level on day 60. So by focusing on that level of aggregation, it's super safe for them to double spend or double down on their current strategy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Where don't get too caught up in like every single ad set or even every single channel. As long as you're spending profitably and your business is growing and you're making money at a whole, like that should be successful, right? Like that's how you should measure yourself.
Also, I also believe that, for example, if you have the mindset to extend the time in which you get the money back, I think that's also an interesting growth lever. because most people will be optimizing towards the other way, and that most of them will realize that it's almost impossible. And it's when you want to scale, the return ad spend gets even harder. The more ad spend, the lowest is the ROAS. So for companies that are really taking the risk and willing to go a little bit further and say, okay, I'm getting my money back on day 60. What happens if I push this to 180 days? They will be outspending their competitors, and they will be, by doing this, they will be able to spend more money and grow more. Still, you need to have cash. The cash flow is important to do this strategy. But I also believe that this approach or this mindset should go beyond. Instead of decreasing, increase the target for your return ad spend.
Do you think that increases risks for advertisers, where it takes longer for you to find out if something is profitable? What if something changes in your product, changes in your conversion? Does it? Can you project that early on, or is that an increased risk because it takes 90 days or 120 days to find out?
I think that it will depend on the confidence level that you have on your proxies for the early days. So if you see that on day 7, if you have a ROAS below 0.5, it means that you will never get your money back, and that has been the case for the past 2 years. Then maybe that's a strong proxy that this cohort is not going to perform as expected. But I agree with you. It's of course it's more risky, but because it's more risky, it means there's a reward on the other side.
Meta ads expert Marcus Burke.
You were talking about how blended CPA is irrelevant. I thought it was so interesting. I think that we all have these metrics that we rely off of, and the changing ad world sometimes means that, these metrics aren't relevant anymore. And I'm not an ad acquisition, mobile growth acquisition expert. And others have told me that, looking at blended ROAS, return on ad spend, is the only true way to understand what's actually going on. So I was curious to understand the difference in your mind. How is blended CPA different from blended ROAS? And it's curious to dig in more to what you're talking about there.
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, for context, the presentation was named something like Meta Ads AI aligning your kind of full funnel. So in the end, I looked into kind of what are the levers I, as a full funnel growth marketer, can still be pulling while there's a lot of stuff that is taking over by AI sooner than later. And so when I talk about blended CPA, I talk about like what's reported by Meta in the end. I totally agree with everyone you talk to that you always want to look at your overall blended business numbers, because if your ad platform tells you everything looks fine, but you're losing money on the back end, then nothing is fine. But when looking at your CPA metrics or cost per trial, cost per subscription, whatever you're feeding that ad platform, I mostly see people kind of running their creative tests and optimizing their campaigns just based on the kind of cost per result that is reported in Ads Manager. But then Meta is such a vast platform. Like, you can be running ads on something like 20 plus placements, with each of these having totally different user behavior, totally different audiences behind them. And therefore, if you see a $10 cost per trial, let's say, in your cost per results, and that's from Instagram Reels, then that's going to be a very different story compared to if it's $10 cost per trial coming from something like a Facebook feed, just because that's used by a different audience. So don't just look at what's kind of coming from your campaign in total. Look at the breakdowns, figure out kind of that traffic composition to understand, am I driving valuable traffic or just cheap traffic? And oftentimes people ask me, like, what's a good cost per trial on Meta? And it's like, well, that heavily depends on like your down funnel, the kind of your pricing, and in the end, that traffic composition. Like, I've seen apps scaling profitably with $100 cost per trial, and I've seen apps burning money at $10 cost per trial. So in the end, blended CPA doesn't matter for that reason.
Can you set different CPA goals per placement, or are you saying post the fact, do your analysis and try to break down by placement?
So in the end, you have a few tools available there to kind of steer that composition. One is creative in the end. Creative equals targeting. So depending on the ad you're using, that is going to address a different audience and a different kind of placement. For example, if you run a static ad, it's much more likely to run on Facebook feed. If you run a 9:16 short form video, then it's more likely to run on Instagram Reels, just by kind of where that native media type belongs. And then the audience targeting comes on top. If you speak to like a pain point for elderly people, then that's likely to show up on Facebook just because that's where that audience hangs out. While if it's a younger issue, then that's usually going to go on Instagram and potentially Reels. So based on the creative type, you can already steer targeting. And then what I do is basically group my creatives by where I'm expecting them to deliver and update that over time as I actually see where it goes. So if I find, well, I have this kind of short form video, it always goes on Instagram Reels, then I have an ad set that only contains these types of creatives, while I have another ad set that only contains the types of creatives that go onto Facebook feed and like the more mature, high value placements. And over time, that grows quite complex. Like at times, like then I have like not just one business as usual campaign with one ad set doing all the work, but I have like maybe 5-10 different ad sets that all contain kind of different messaging angles, media types that I know in the end will result in a different down funnel behavior. While each of them is just targeted broadly. Like they all have the same setting, but the creative does the targeting. And the other tool that was recently released actually, or that recently was released in Ads Manager UI at least, is value rules. And that's a way to actually encode different value on an audience placement basis, even when you're running broad. So you can say, well, my money should be spent on all placements, and you decide where based on the creative. But I'm already encoding in the algorithm that, for example, Instagram Reels is 30% less valuable because I know it never performs as well. Or you're saying, well, my 45 plus age group male should always be bid up by 40% because I know that's kind of my most interesting ICP.
Today on the Price Power Podcast, we're talking with Gabe Kwakyi. Gabe has been a leader in the mobile marketing world for years. He founded an agency called Incipia. He co-authored the Advanced App Store Optimization Handbook, worked with massive brands including Walmart, Coinbase, Duolingo, and more.
I was telling him all about, what I learned at Lingvano and before. But to your question, I was able to recognize which pieces were there that were important and what to try and where to have confidence and what to look for, because I had run and scaled campaigns with Coinbase, with Walmart, with People Fund, just like all these other companies back in the day. And so I knew, for instance, that influencer content, not just UGC, but like really people that are good behind the camera or the phone and that have a way of like attracting attention, getting people to like and, engage in content, that worked. And that we needed to find, it's really about, especially in paid social, creative hits. A lot of the creatives you try, it's just not going to work. And it's only the small percentage of creatives. Like everything is the Pareto principle everywhere, all the time. So too with creatives and scaling UA. So when I came in, I tested, some creatives that they had in the account already. We tried making some static ads, some graphic design ads, some motion graphics. I tried making a few videos myself. We had some of our teachers who had videos, and those were like one of the earliest hits. One of our teachers who was doing the colors in American Sign Language. But then I saw that the influencer videos actually wasn't fully organic, or most of it wasn't organic. We did contracts with influencers, and I saw that a couple of them had really good virality scale. And so that was that early signal, like, okay, there's something here. And what if we chuck that into advertising and we see how that goes? And, we tried a few of them. Some of them didn't work. And then we kept trying, and I kept looking for those hits, the things that like within a day, you see that Meta is starting to scale this up and it loves it. And you're getting great CPIs, great CTRs, great cost per trials. And you can see that like this is really strong performance. So then I just started opening up the budgets and really expanding out the audience targeting and really like getting more surface area for this strong creative to get out there. And on the side, we started up a pipeline where we started to work with more and more creators and pull in more influencers. And so constant testing was important. But it was realizing that creative hits what drive paid social, that there were some promising creatives in the mix overall that hadn't been deployed from Instagram organic to Instagram advertising, and to just, when it started to work, have the guts to 10x the budget. And the co-founders as well, like I checked in with them, props to them. I'm like, okay, this is the time to press, the budget. When it's working, go all in. So can I raise the budgets, 10x in like a short period of time? Do we have the cash flows to support this? And they said, yep, we're good. So then go in. And that's another thing, like, it's temporary. Creative hits are temporary, and you get this excellent performance period, but then it always at some point saturates and comes down. So you have to learn how to like navigate these periods where you have it, press your advantage. And when you don't have it and you get into a drought, pull back, realize that you've just got to work to get another hit. And you're going to feel like a failure. You're going to feel like, shit, like, why isn't it working? Nothing's working. Our performance is so bad. But that's the dynamics of modern paid social. You just got to get a strong enough hit that it works.
Today, we're talking with the founder of Ramdam, Xavier de Baillenx. Ramdam is a creator ads platform that powers the advertising engine of some of the top apps out there like Photoroom, Flow, Tinder, and more, delivering over 10,000 creatives per month.
We always recommend our clients to start, unless they are not targeting the US market, but it's very rare, to focus on the US market first, get some winners, and then once you have that, you can expand to other countries.
And so really you need the new creative because you're putting in a different language where it's you need a French person for the French market to feel natural.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Why yes and no? Because that's actually counterintuitive. But if you have a top performing creative in English, in US English, it can actually be a top performing for non-English speaking countries, French and Germany. It works.
Yeah.
It doesn't work as much as in the US, but it works. So you can use actually the original ad. For better result, what we recommend is getting also these same creatives with local creators, with French creators if you're targeting the French market. But my advice would be do both.
Yeah.
Test the English-speaking ads, but also use local creators or use AI to get creatives in local language.
Do you think of let's say English UGC in the French market and French UGC in the French market as like different placements where you have, audience network and you have Facebook feed where potentially the different creators reach different people. And so you have like different reach, or is it just that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, especially with Meta. They launched Andromeda recently, and the diversity of creators is key. So, for example, if you launch a campaign, so let's say you're launching 20 different creatives. If you get 20 different creatives by, let's say, 2 or 3 creators, or maybe only 1 creator, Meta or even TikTok, they will consider that it's almost the same ad. Okay, so they will not reach out to new audiences. So it's super, super important to have a diversity of creators. The more diverse your creators base is, the more likely you reach out to new customers. So it's very, very important to have many, many different creators. And this is how we can help, because we usually provide 1 creatives for 1 creator, and we have like 50K active creators globally, including 25K in the US. So you can get many different faces to promote your app super seamlessly. Also with AI now, you can define any persona you like. That makes it even easier to multiply the incarnation that will talk about your app.
Got it. That makes sense. So we start with 20 to 40. How many do you usually end up with
based on that performance? What do you usually see?
So just first a number, you need to know that it's completely okay. Like an ad that doesn't perform is pretty normal. So usually the success rate is around maybe 5%, something like that. So basically, as I told you earlier, the more you scale, the more creative you need. Plus, you will need the ad fatigue, so you will end up with hundreds and hundreds of ads. I mean, our number one clients now, today, we are delivering more than 1,000 creatives per month.
Wow.
To give you an idea.
Yeah. What like, you don't have to give the exact, but like, what spend level do you need to support that level of creatives?
Yeah, on their side, they are high 7 figures per month.
Right.
In terms of media spends. So they're big spender on both TikTok and Meta ads. But even with 5 or 6 figures, you need a minimum 20 to 50 creatives per month.
Yeah, just because of the creative fatigue is so fast.
Okay.
Yeah. And not all of it performs.
Yeah, it's basically a game of numbers.
And today on the Price Power podcast, we're talking with Anthony Scarpaci. Anthony was a global VP of growth at Acorn, senior director at NerdWallet. He's also worked in growth roles at Betterment and Blue Apron. He is now a growth consultant advisor for consumer subscription brands through his own consultancy, Tunamatic. And today, we're talking referral programs.
So when I think about referral programs, there are quite a few key elements of what makes them successful. When you mentioned Dropbox and PayPal, the first thing I would share there is them being some of the earliest brands to do this space. The world of this incentive-based structure was generally pretty new, so it drove a lot of interest and enthusiasm from the base. And so the testing of these two-sided offers of either free storage or additional incentives worked really well for them to start to drive scale. And in the case of Dropbox, there's also something really endemically sort of natural within the product experience that makes sense for that growth loop from an organic perspective as well. For brands that are not necessarily ones that have a sharing component naturally baked into their product, and they're starting to think about referral programs beyond natural word of mouth after they have really strong product market fit and have hit a good level of scale. I like to think about it in what I like to call the right framework, which is just something based on what I've seen and then what I've led at Acorns. And so we could break that down of the different components because I think it would be helpful to think about all the various facets of it. The first one being R is relevance. So one area that a lot of brands struggle is they think, well, they just need to do cash incentives. But if cash is not aligned to the product delivery or what the customer's relationship to the brand is, it can be jarring. It could not be motivating. So you need something that is both relevant for the referring individual as well as the customer on the other side. The next one is, okay, how do you think about that incentive structure? And beyond the relevancy, you need to think about something that is going to get somebody out of bed, if you will, to start to refer. Because one of the biggest challenges that I see in a lot of referral programs is businesses have this small evergreen program that sits in the background. It's a small incentive. It's not necessarily the most compelling. It's not well promoted. And so it doesn't get a lot of participation. So really thinking about what are going to be the incentives that you use to get people excited and motivated, but also are going to further entrench both your existing customer and your referring customer deeply into the product. So I've done a lot of testing at brands like Acorns where we were testing certain types of incentives and then identifying, well, those things may not match as well to the long-term customer behavior that we want. So we continue to experiment with ultimately what are the incentives that are going to lead to a satisfied customer on both sides who's in love with the product and further becomes an authentic advocate for the brand going forward. So that's I. G is guardrails. So while that's great, while you have a lot of these compelling incentives, you need to make sure that you're putting the right mechanisms in place to prevent fraud, gaming, all of those factors.
A good example of where this went wrong, earlier in my career, I was at Blue Apron when it was pre-IPO, seemed like a rocket ship at the time. And within that meal delivery kit space, everybody was effectively doing referral programs where there would be a free box that you could send to a friend or family member, no strings attached, no questions asked. So one, there would naturally be some gaming from individuals just by changing locations or individuals who live at the same address. But then also for the friend side, there was no mechanism to require them to build that habit or give them a chance to build that habit paired with the incentive. And what you see now is in the remaining leaders in that space, like HelloFresh, any sort of referral programs require that there is, a series of deliveries for the customer to really try the product and make sure, and really give it a chance to see if it's, a fit for their lifestyle and for them to fall in love with it, which leads to more sustainable, profitable customer acquisition through that channel. So I think that's one area that some brands also get it wrong, not thinking about guardrails and the right requirements of the program when getting it started. The next one, H. So this one is really key. And this one, I think, broadly from a marketing perspective, there's always areas that are missed. This is about being human-centric. And by being human-centric, I think there's a few layers there. There is transparency and authenticity, but there's also the consistency of the customer journey and how you present the program to those customers within your app experience, through email, even through paid or organic social amplification. When I look at some referral programs of existing clients that I have now, or just other brands, sometimes I see, well, maybe they have the right incentives in place, but they're not getting them in front of the customer in a really prominent way or at the right time. So that's a key area to think about. Well, okay, let's take the journey one step at a time for the referring customer. How do they learn about the program? As we talked about before, make sure those incentives are compelling enough for them to be interested in activating and participating. How do you reduce all of the frictions to make it as easy as possible for them to share the referral opportunity with their friends in their network? And then how do you make sure every single touch point along the way continues to reinforce what are both sides getting out of it, reminding them they're in the right place, providing the education on the product to that new customer along the way, and making sure that as they go through the sign up process, they know I'm in the right place. I still have this incentive following me so that I'm going to get rewarded. I know my friend will get rewarded, and close that full loop to make sure that it feels consistent and congruent from an experience perspective versus piecemealing all these components that don't feel natural or make sense to a customer. And that's one area that people sort of fall off as well. And then the last one of T is really sort of two pieces. It's timing and tracking. So timing, we talked a little bit upfront about how, like, when is the right time for you to have a referral program? And part of it is you have to be post product market fit. You have to have customers who love you. You have to already have hit some of those milestones. And then you also have to have a meaningful scale of your customer base to make the program do anything sort of really meaningful for you, because you have to be careful about cannibalization of organic word of mouth. So the moment that you start to incentivize in any meaningful way sharing, you're naturally going to have some level of cannibalization of those who have come in before, who would refer otherwise. So you really want to make sure that you cut that piece down. You really want to make sure that you consider that before you start to incentivize things, because it will change your blended customer acquisition costs and economics for the business. And then lastly, on tracking, this is underlying fundamentals. You need to make sure you have a system so that you can track successfully all the referrals that are happening from your existing customers, so that you maintain a really positive experience for both of them. And ideally, you get to a place that you can create some transparency and visibility for them to know the status of their referrals and when they're getting paid for successful referrals, all of those pieces. So there's a lot there, but to reinforce sort of the framework is this right framework, right? Relevancy, incentives, guardrails, human centricity, and then timing and tracking. And I think by making sure you consider and walk through all of those steps, a brand can understand, is referral the right thing for us right now? Do we have the capacity to start to test into this, and where might be the biggest gaps so we can refine the program over time?
Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Please go to pricepowerpodcast.com to see all the episodes. Go to Spotify and YouTube and give us a subscribe and follow so you don't miss any episodes. All right, talk to you next time.